Well, it's that time of year, Hillary.
A week before Christmas. Very exciting.
Um, is it this year in 2020? I don't know.
I'm having a really hard time figuring out what day it is. So I'm really proud of myself that I was able to identify we're a week away from Christmas.
Well, that's good. I have a little thing for advent calendars, so I've got a couple of them around me. Um, so that's kept me. I'm like, today it's after today's door. There are only 6 doors left.
So we have an
Wow.
advent calendar right here too, but that doesn't help me know what day it is. Like I know like the date, like I know the number date. Today's 1/8, but I
Well,
didn't
you.
yesterday.
Oh, the day. You mean the day of the
Day,
week?
the day
Okay.
of the week. I'm just like, I don't know what day of the week it is. It's terrible.
Well, I mean, it's a week till Christmas, and today's episode is all about Christmas in America. It should be fun.
I'm excited about it. I think that this is a new one for us, and
Yeah,
definitely, I think that there's a lot to cover, and I think that there's going to be a lot of things that people can reflect on in this episode.
yeah. Well, let's get started. Welcome to An Incomplete History.
I'm Hilary.
And I'm Geoff.
And we're your hosts for this weekly history podcast.
So, Christmas week. Almost.
What's the weather?
Almost. Wait a minute. What's the weather?
Yeah.
I think there's a little snow coming out, and what do I hear? I promise I'm not going to drive you crazy with too many of them, but I have a bunch of hilarious ones loaded.
I was ready. I've been ready for that. Good.
So, well, I mean, the weather here in San Diego is gorgeous. It's in the high upper 60s. It's clear. It's a little breezy. It's not like a Santa Ana event or anything. As far as I know, there's no mudslides, earthquakes, big fires, anything going on right now in the county. For the first time in a long time, we have no natural disasters occurring at the present moment besides the slow-moving disaster of COVID-19.
I was
Right?
going to say you guys have no ICU beds, so that seems kind of bad.
Well, there's that, right? But I mean, we don't have any natural disasters going on.
Isn't a pandemic a natural disaster?
This one is completely
Just
human
Yeah, that's
spread.
true.
I mean,
True, it's our fault.
it's completely our fault because it was Bill Gates and George Soros with Hillary Clinton.
For any office out there, we've really shrewded it.
Well, we are going to address conspiracies in an upcoming episode. I had a couple more listeners email me. We are doing another conspiracy theory episode, but today's about Christmas. Weather's beautiful here. How's weather in Mississippi?
It's beautiful. It's really clear and sunny out. It's a little chillier than is, I would say, comfortable, but just a light jacket's nice. It's in the 50s. But it's really pretty out. This morning there was some snow on the ground. I don't know if it was snow. I have no idea. It was maybe frost on the grass. It looked snowy, but it was cool. And then it melted by, like 8 in the morning and now it's just kind of sunny and crisp out. It's a nice day.
I'm a little bitter today.
Bitter about.
You know where I like to spend Christmas?
Oh yeah. The happiest place on earth.
Well, no. I don't like to spend Christmas Day there. Good God, no. I love to go to Disneyland during Christmas time. We did go one year. We went for Christmas, and I was like, never again. Like Disney could write me $1,000 check, and I would think twice about going into that park on Christmas Day.
Well, you know where I like to go during Christmas time.
You like to go to. First of all, you're a Knott's Berry Farm.
Knott's Merry Farm during Christmas.
Knott's Merry Farm, right?
And you know what? For this episode, I can see some connections between like the decorations in the Old West town in Knott's Berry Farm,
Uh-huh.
and now, so yeah,
Yeah.
okay, cool.
Yeah. I love Disneyland at Christmas time, but I actually love to go to Hawaii for Christmas.
That's yeah, okay, Mele Kalikimaka.
There's just
That's right, duh.
there's just yeah, Mele Kalikimaka. There's just something about having a Mai Tai and laying out on a beach on Christmas Day is just wonderful, and it sounds perfect to me.
That is
But obviously, none of that's happening this year,
no, no, none of it.
at all. But I mean, Christmas is interesting. I have a lot of friends, and I would include myself in this. I put my Christmas decorations up November 1st this year.
That's sick. I
That's sick.
support it. That's sick. I support it this year because it's been such a disaster.
Oh yeah, I would never. Not. I'm a staunch advocate of no Christmas decorations till the Thanksgiving turkey's been eaten.
I agree that, and for me, it was when I was growing up, I felt like we didn't decorate for Christmas until like the first week of December, maybe even like by the 10th. And
Mhm.
my dad was just ripping garland down like the night of Christmas, like it's over, pack it up, he hated Christmas decorations. But for me, I'm always like, okay, December 1st, I always get my Christmas cards out, although that didn't happen this year because of delays and everything with
We
Shutterfly.
got your lovely card.
Thank you. I was so mad. That was a whole situation where they didn't come in time. And anyway, I'm glad you got it. um, but yeah, I mean, Christmas decorations for me, they come after Thanksgiving. But this year being such a mess, I totally get the November 1st decorating.
Oh,
Is your
yeah.
tree still alive?
We don't use a living tree.
Oh, my tree's been dead for like a week. It's very
Well,
sad.
I need like a because we live in a condo and it's a smaller space, so we need like a pencil tree. So we got this great pencil tree. It's fine. I grew up with living trees, and today I think we're going to talk about a lot of our personal experiences as well to kind of breathe life into kind of this historical view of Christmas. But I mean, artificial trees I used to be really against, and then there are things they just don't do that I like. Like they don't drop their needles all over the floor. At the end of the season, you just disassemble them and put them in a box and put them in storage till next year. Um, yeah, there no watering is necessary, and usually they're pre-strung. The lights are pre-strung, so you don't even have to deal with like getting lights out and untangling them and decorating them.
Isn't the untangling part of the fun? Particularly if you're married, it's like a real team building exercise. And patience.
I detect a little bit of tension there.
Putting them on every year brings
Well, it's the merriest time of year, and it's also the time of year where families just get into these knockdown, drag out arguments.
yeah. And you know what? I will start here with the episode of like actually talking history. It's like we created this entire burden for ourselves
Oh yeah.
nowhere. Like we just decided kind of suddenly we're just going to do this whole shebang. And it's not rooted in anything other than trying to build American culture. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean I think that's a thing. It's and I know some listeners might be a little offended or might be surprised, but it's while I said last week a thing about religion, and I do believe this a lot, that you can't understand the conceptualization of early American law and ideas and culture without understanding Puritans, English Protestant ideas, specifically Puritan ones. Christmas, as celebrated in the United States today, has little to do with religion at all. Uh, and I think it's useful to go back and look in, like, even in the first few decades of an English presence in North America, the English Civil War happens in England in the mid 17th century. And one of the first things Oliver Cromwell, who's a Puritan, does after Charles I is beheaded, um, that's that's a whole other story. And I think it's one of the most important things that ever happened in political history. Um, One of the things he does is he closes taverns, closes brothels, and cancels Christmas.
What a killjoy.
Well, because he says something that is actually true. He says this is a holiday that has nothing to do with our religion.
It's true. It has nothing to do with, but you know what? I would argue with that all day because Christianity is created in the early centuries, right? And
Hmm.
I think the beef is not so much with Christmas, it's with Catholicism because Christmas was created by the Catholics, right?
Right.
And so I think it's the Puritan rejection of the Pope.
Right, a little bit. I mean, here's that's a whole other thing, and this is a recurrent theme. Like, you can't understand kind of English history from the Civil War on, or American history, without understanding kind of threads of anti-Catholicism. But I think what Cromwell does when he's saying we're not going to have Christmas celebrated anymore, he's recognizing a reality, which is Christmas, the way it was celebrated in England in the mid 17th century prior to its being canceled, was much more connected with two specific pagan holidays than it was with anything Christian. And that there'd been kind of this Christian veneer put over it. And it's really what the Roman Catholic Church did as it spread in the first millennia across Europe, is it would take long established holidays and celebrations and kind of repackage them as Christian and tie them to something Christian. And midwinter celebrations are nothing new. Across the Northern Hemisphere, you've got cultures that celebrate some type of midwinter thing around the winter solstice, right?
Right. And well, it's all about repurposing because I don't know, I feel bad. I'm going to use this quote, but there's this quote, don't destroy, sanctify. And so the idea was we're
Mm-hmm.
not going to destroy pagan holidays. And this idea comes out of very early Christianity in the first, second, third centuries that we're not going to destroy pagan holidays. What we're going to do, though, is try to draw pagans into the religion by repurposing or sanctifying the holidays they already celebrate by earmarking Christian festivals or days of observation. And so, like you said, this winter solstice time, it's about, well, let's repurpose this already exciting, happy festival where there's food and friends and dancing and all this, and we'll just say it's Jesus's birthday. Because there's nothing in the Bible that says specifically when Jesus was born. Um, there are some hints in the Bible that it could be with the reference to sheep herders, it could be in the late spring, with the reference of the
Well,
star,
tax day.
and it could it could be, right?
No, I mean it's the Roman census. Why would they conduct its census in the middle of December? That would be silly
Yeah, yeah. So
because you wouldn't.
traveling, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So they repurpose it though, and it's the Saturnalia, I think you mentioned, is like the worshiping of Saturn, and then it's right around winter solstice, the 21st, and then the 25th is the celebration of the sun, sun. And the Christians,
Sol Invictus, the undying sun,
yeah, and
whose birthday's on December 25th.
right, but they said, well, let's make it the birthday of the sun, son, the son of God.
Mm-hmm.
Let's repurpose it. And so Christmas began to be celebrated December 25th for that reason, was just to draw new people into the religion.
Did you know Sol Invictus' mother was a virgin as well,
Do
and
Yeah,
that
so that
and that
that story is
and,
very common, right?
and that he died and got better?
Got better. I don't think that the Christians say got better, but yeah, I mean that's a common story. Mythology that goes across many different regions, and I think that there's even like an Egyptian myth about
Mm-hmm.
someone who's the son of God who dies and raises, right? I mean, this is just a common thread in cultures. This story that we say is Jesus's birth is a common cultural myth, right?
Yeah, and let's talk about myth really quickly. It's funny. I have to tell my students this all the time. When I say myth, I am not saying something is true or is not true. Myth
Right. No,
means
nothing to do with
it,
true or false, right?
right, right. It's not. It's nothing to do with truthiness, as Stephen Colbert would say. It has to do with the way it's imagined in the culture that creates it, right? But I think before we kind of get into the nuts and bolts of how like Saturnalia and Yule, these two pagan holidays, become Christmas that we celebrate today, why untangling Christmas lights, how it's connected to those at all, I think it's useful to pause really quickly and bring out a couple of reasons midwinter festivals happen. I mean, what's going on in early agricultural societies? So we're talking about societies more than 2,000 years ago. Why would midwinter be a time to celebrate? Um, and it's kind of a perfect storm. And uh, some of the reasons are very agricultural. So if you're an agricultural society, by the time winter rolls around, especially the middle of December, the middle to end of December, there's not much agricultural labor for you to work on because fields are frozen, there may be snow on the ground. So there's not any of that labor for you to do. Second, there was a practice in a lot of agricultural communities as the winter started, you would go through and slaughter a lot of your livestock. Not all of it, but you would slaughter a lot of your livestock. First, that meat would freeze well, so you could actually keep it in the winter. But second, it meant fewer animals you had to feed over the winter. So you could kind of stretch things like hay and things a little bit longer. They also have all those crops they've harvested in the fall. And then the first alcohol that's been kind of fermented out of late summer and fall crops is becoming available. So it's kind of like you have this perfect storm of a lot of free time, a lot of meat and other food available, and alcohol. And it not coincidentally happens around the winter solstice, which is the low point of the sun in the sky. And the moment, after the winter solstice, the sun starts coming back. So it's like this perfect storm for a celebration.
It's a perfect storm for celebration, but it's also a moment where it's a little bit sad and dreary and cold and it gets dark, right? Like there's a lot about bringing warmth into the house, having a celebration. It's related to alcohol, it's related to bringing trees in, it's related to candles and lighting things. It's about making this moment in the wintertime a little brighter and happier because it's literally dark outside and it's actually cold.
The Yule log,
Yeah.
right? Um, so, and there's a real kind of fear that lingers from ancient times, anxiety about this, right? About the sun. And this isn't to suggest that somebody 2,500 years ago literally believes the sun is not going to return, that it's going to continue to diminish and eventually just go away. But, myths had been developed over centuries that something had to be done to kind of bring the sun back or celebrate the sun's return. Druids would sacrifice somebody to bring the sun back. And a lot of Christian symbols surrounding Christmas relate to something of a sacrifice, right?
Right.
But I mean, do you want to talk a little bit about Yule? Or do you want to talk about Saturnalia a little bit more?
No, you can go ahead and talk about them. I have my Saturnalia stuff, I guess, but
Yeah, let's talk about Saturnalia, then we'll switch to Yule.
well, no, go ahead. Go with Yule first.
Okay. So Yule is, it is the Northern European equivalent of a midwinter festival. Saturnalia is the Mediterranean and Roman one. This is the one that's practiced by Germanic peoples across Germany, Scandinavia, and then even Celtic peoples and kind of parts of France and the British Isles. And, we don't have a lot of information because all of these were pre-literate societies. They didn't write these things down. We get early accounts via Christian missionaries. And a lot of the stuff isn't actually written down until Christianity's already been introduced in the region. So there's a lot of kind of reworking of what it is. But what it was, there was at its most basic level, it involved a feast where they would pass around a drinking horn. And it would create a connection between one another as you got drunk and a connection with the gods. And that's kind of its most basic kind of view. But it has to do with kind of ancestor worship, return of the dead, ghost stories. So it certainly sounds a lot more like another holiday. I know it's Hillary's favorite holiday on the calendar than it does Christmas.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I also got like some really uh like some real anxiety and COVID vibes, and you're like, oh, they're passing around thing to drink out of and everybody's drinking out of the same thing. Um but yeah, I mean, it does feel a little more Halloweenish, right, with the celebrations. And there's a lot of cultures that celebrate Christmas in kind of a dark way. And there's like a discussion of demons, right? Like the Greeks say that there's like a demon running around for 12 days. So there's some interesting things that go on with Christmas in different cultures. Um, but I think that our celebration of Christmas and a lot of the traditions that we have come from the Roman festival of Saturnalia.
I Yes, but I think Yule is at least as important because one of the big points of Yule ends up being this use of fire, because fire in these big bonfires or candles were perceived as means to ward off spirits of the dead that you maybe didn't want around you. And this is not only the Yule log, and but it's things like candles. And why candles? I mean, I've got a little candle thing. It's got 5 candles on it, and it's from Sweden, and it's a descendant of this. Um, Fireplaces, people love to get special wood to burn in their fireplaces around Christmas. The lights on your trees, these are all this light. Those lights were originally intended to ward you from the dead.
That's really interesting about the light and bringing light into the house during this time of darkness. Um, I think though that though, and we don't even think about those things obviously when we're like lighting our candles or putting our lights on our trees, but that they do have this connection to death and trying to ward off. It's also trying to ward off cold and darkness too. Is that fair to say?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's about like welcoming winter but also trying to like keep winter away, and I think that that's where this worship of the sun comes around this time. And so like ancient celebrations and traditions are really intricately woven into what we do now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and then we've got Saturnalia and we've got Yule, and then there's a
Talk
pretty lengthy
about
gap.
Saturnalia.
Yeah, yeah. Let's talk about Saturnalia. Then we'll talk about that gap, because it's not till the 4th century that we start to get some hint of Christmas being celebrated by Christians
Right, and then
as a
there's
thing
a
on it.
really long gap between that, and then you have Francis of Assisi come along and talking about nativities, which that's another tradition that we can get into. And then it's not until the mid 19th century that you really start to see Christmas celebrations take off in any sort of way that we recognize. So it's Christmas celebrations are American, that we have now, and they're kind of an invention, but they really kind of harp on these traditions from a very very long time ago. So Saturnalia was a mid-December festival, an ancient Roman pagan festival, and it honored the agriculture god Saturn. So Saturnalia, the traditions that stem from Saturnalia celebrations are really kind of tied up in what we do now in a lot of ways. So work would come to a complete stop during this time. There would be a week long celebration. People would party and drink and eat. And one of the major components of this was that masters would serve their servants instead during this whole week. And because everybody had come to a halt at work, so even servants weren't supposed to work during this time. Um, Schools, courts, everything was closed. And people would decorate their homes with wreaths and garland and greenery. Um, they would wear colorful clothing during this time. They would gamble, sing. They would just have a huge party, a huge giant festival. They would give gifts. Candles were also a big part of this, and it was just a giant week long soiree, right? And it would always
Mhm.
kind of fall mid to late December for that whole week. Um, this was repurposed though around the 4th century, right, by Christians who were trying to create. I don't know, some distance from pagan festivals and traditions to try to say,
Hmm.
you can still do those things, but we're going to call it something different now. Right. So the Pope at the time, was it Julius who said that?
Hmm.
So Pope Julius says that December 25th, the day of Saturnalia, will now be the date for Jesus's birth. We're just going to completely take over this holiday, and we're going to say we're celebrating Jesus on this day.
Well, I mean, it's a shrewd move on his part too, because this is, I mean, this the Roman god we mentioned previously, Sol Invictus, it was a relatively new religion as well, and it was gaining a lot of adherents. And this was one way for the Catholic Church, which now enjoyed official recognition and was officially the Church of the Roman Empire. This was a way that they could come in and actually tamp down on these competing religions, is to like take over their major holidays.
Yeah, take over the holidays and say like, hey, you can have fun in this religion too. We've got this really cool holiday here. I mean, it's kind of funny when you think back on how it was so strategic and politicized, and it had absolutely nothing to do with, say, the Bible or anything. I mean, it was just all kind of created in order to
Mhm.
create a hype and publicize. That's what it was. It was like publicity for this new-ish religion that they wanted people to adhere to and to follow. And it was a really good way to get people, hey, come to our Christmas party. I
So
think
I
history
know
do this.
so we I promised we would, this episode we were going to talk about Christmas in America, and I want to kind of fast forward a little bit because I want to make some things clear. Beginning of the 19th century, Christmas is not celebrated in the United States.
Well, and as a matter of fact, let's rewind a little bit. It was illegal to celebrate Christmas in the 17th century in Boston. And this is,
Hmm.
a Cromwell situation as well. And the Puritans, between 1659 and 1681, it was illegal to celebrate Christmas in Boston. And that stems from what I had mentioned earlier. Now, hopefully, it's a little more clear based on our previous discussion that this was a Puritan rejection of Catholicism, of Catholic tradition, of a Catholic creation, because they're saying, look, there is nothing in the Bible about celebrating Christmas on December 25th. This is pagan. We reject this. We reject we reject Catholicism, and we're the ones who do it right. We're just going to go about our business. And they worked on that day. I mean, nobody
Well,
was stopped.
Elizabeth Cady Stanton said she recounted that when she was growing up, the only great festivals celebrated in that early 19th century period by children, by youths, as she called them, were the 4th of July, Thanksgiving, and see our Thanksgiving episode to hear a little bit about the Thanksgiving she may have celebrated, and Training Day as the only great festivals. Like that, there were no others. That Christmas Eve didn't even mention. And you would think for youths that would be mentioned, but you can actually look at things like boarding school records, and boarding school shows there were only 2 week-long vacations um, in the entire year, along with 4th of July and Thanksgiving, just like Elizabeth Cady Stanton said. But Christmas and New Year's were just ignored. They weren't even a blip on the radar, which is interesting because at the same moment, early 19th century, it's being celebrated in England. Christmas is being celebrated.
Not in the same way, but it is gaining some traction there.
Not in the same way, but I mean, the Bank of England has an official holiday for Christmas Day by the 19th century in England.
Yes, and
Um,
the United States is still ignoring it. And in the very beginning of our founding in the late 18th century, Congress would meet on Christmas Day. You can go back and look through records, and I remember being in the archive a couple times and seeing records from Christmas or right around Christmas, and just being like, why are they meeting at this time? But it's because it's not even a holiday. It's not, again, like you
mhm.
said, it's not a blip on the radar. People may go to church. People may know it is Christmas Day because it has been that way for so many centuries, but it just wasn't celebrated in this way. Um, it is interesting to see that it's gaining traction in England by the early 19th century. And then the mythology around Christmas and Santa and reindeer and all that kind of stuff starts through authors, through writing.
Though he's one of the most popular saints in the Greek as well as the Latin Church, there's scarcely anything historically certain about him except that he was Bishop of Myra in the 4th century. Some of the main points in his legend are as follows. He was born at Patara, a city in Lycia in Asia Minor. In his youth, he made a pilgrimage to Egypt and Palestine. Shortly after his return, he became Bishop of Myra. Cast into prison during the persecution of Diocletian, he was released after the accession of Constantine and was present at the Council of Nicaea. In 1087, Italian merchants stole his body at Myra, bringing it to Bari in Italy.
So that's
That
what
is,
about St. Nicholas.
that's St. Nicholas. And that's all there is, basically.
Well, he's the patron saint of children, though, and that there was myths around his generosity and that he was always like a secret gift giver to children. Like he was very generous with kids. That's why that myth around Santa comes about.
Right. But I mean, this is the entry is what's known about him. Everything else is stuff that's kind of contested, right? And it's interesting that this guy who's pretty much this minor figure is the face of Christmas.
We can thank the Coca-Cola company for that.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting. So there are not as many good books, historical kind of well researched and peer reviewed books about the history of Christmas as I expected there to be. But a couple of them make the same argument that it's actually the rise of a national consumer culture does more than anything else to create Christmas as we understand it today. And that's predicated on lines of commerce, lines of communication, industries that span the country, roads, railroads, a mail network that's able to deliver mail consistently and efficiently, the rise of newspapers, books, magazines, as well as the immigration of a couple of specific communities that have very strong Christmas traditions, including Germans.
The Germans and the Moravians, right? The Christmas
Yeah.
traditions a lot of the Christmas traditions that we have now come out of Pennsylvania, come out of German communities. And the idea of bringing a tree into the house has those really deep, ancient pagan roots about bringing life into the home. And Germans had been bringing Christmas trees inside during the month of December for centuries. And so this gets carried over. But
Millennia.
yes, yes. But arguably, why it becomes really, really popular, because there's Germans who are doing it in Pennsylvania um, in the 1800s. I mean, before we really start to celebrate Christmas. But a lot of scholars have pointed to the the publicized Christmas happening in Queen Victoria's reign. So Queen
Mm-hmm.
Victoria marries a German, right? She marries Prince Albert. He's German, so he comes to the monarchy and the British crown with all of these traditions that are coming from Germany. And so the first photo of a Christmas tree and the description of the tree was publicized and then distributed in the United States right around 1850-ish. And so then you start to see Christmas trees everywhere. It's not just in German homes, although they had been there for a long time. It's Victoria and it's the Victorian reign. She has so much influence on culture, and people see, oh, there's beautiful Christmas tree Queen Victoria has, and then boom, it just takes off. And it's interesting you mentioned the mail, because that is so tied to all of this. That was one of the very first Christmas traditions that we picked up that we still have today, and it's the distribution of Christmas cards.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's interesting too. So the mid 19th century, this starting to become this national holiday that's celebrated with some regional variations, but generally celebrated in very similar ways across the country, also coincides with the rise of a new focus on children and childhood. Is that fair to say?
Yes, but it's also a focus on destitute children. It's a focus that's also on, children who are needy or who are orphaned or who need extra help. And I think that that's directly correlated to the number of orphans in the wake of the Civil War.
Yeah. I think it is very much a middle class driven celebration, right? I mean, it's which is why it ties into the things of like newspapers and magazines is the middle class. This is a way to check to see, are you dressing, are you having the food you're supposed to have a good Christmas, are you getting providing the right stuff for your children and your family, are you doing it correctly, but at the same time going in and helping children who are in worse situations. And a lot of this ties in with kind of industrialization. And this makes me realize we should probably have an episode where we talk about industrialization and children in the United States, because it's an interesting conversation. But this is the moment where we start to get real critics that children should not be employed, that a child's job is to go to school and to be a child.
But it takes a long time for that to actually
Oh, yeah.
solidify, right?
Well, but I mean, it does take a long time. But if you look at who's growing up in this period, it's people like Teddy Roosevelt.
Mm-hmm.
It's people who are real advocates for getting children out of the workplace.
Right. And also, like, the idea of childhood in general starts to develop during this time. And that's also an interesting conversation, that there is such a thing as a period where you should be carefree and not worry, about money or taking care of the family or doing any sort of labor. And that the idea of childhood in and of itself doesn't develop until around this time. And we're talking about the late 19th century now, the second half of the 19th century, 1850 onward, where this idea of having a childhood even exists. And this isn't even cemented until well into the 20th century, that the idea of childhood and that somehow children shouldn't be responsible for anything and parents are, that's kind of a new idea. And Christmas has a lot to do with that. This celebrating Christmas and the mythology and Santa and the gifts and the this and that. It's all rooted in this idea that childhood should exist, or something called childhood should exist, and be joyful and carefree.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard, I think, a lot of time for people to understand that prior to the mid 19th century, children weren't celebrated or the focus of gatherings like they are in contemporary America. Even like Christmas is celebrated in England at the beginning of the 19th century. We had talked about how it was being celebrated there. It was definitely not a child-focused celebration at all. It was actually a pretty raucous
Oh, it was
affair.
a party, right? It was kind of put the kids to bed. This isn't about them. We're getting drunk
Right.
and eating and dancing all night. I mean,
Well,
let's do that, but
so let's pause a little bit about kind of the historical background of all this, because I want to compare notes about what a traditional Christmas means to each of us, and we can kind of pick apart a few of those and point to where they come from. So, what does a typical Christmas? Did a typical Christmas when you grew up? What was it like?
I've had lots of conversations with my husband about this, because his Christmas looked very different than my Christmas. And
Not surprisingly.
Not surprising. There's a lot of differences there. For me, I mean, and this sounds like Christmas for me was just like piles and piles and piles of presents, like more presents than you could possibly use or enjoy or whatever. I mean, you were so overwhelmed with gifts, and it was great. I mean, Christmas for me was awesome. We would go from like house to house to house. We'd go to my mom's house, so my grandmother on my mom's side's house, we'd unwrap a pile of presents. We'd go to my grandmother on my dad's side, we'd unwrap a pile of presents. We'd wake up in the morning and Santa had left presents. And then we would open more presents. And then there was food and presents and food and presents. And the whole month was consumed with baking. We would bake everything. My grandma and I would bake. And that's a tradition I've kept and held on to, the baking. But for me, I mean, it was just so much about gifts. But I went to a Catholic school. So when I was in Catholic school, it was all about Advent calendar, singing Christmas carols, having a Christmas play, doing a living nativity. And the nativity is interesting because that can be traced back to the 12th century, right, with Francis of Assisi.
Hmm.
When he was trying to explain Jesus's birth, he used live animals to show what happened in the manger scene. And so that's where we come up with the manger scene and the nativity. That's from St. Francis. So we would do that. And we would have a Christmas pageant, stuff like that. So does that kind of sound like your Christmas? Just like presents, food, sing.
Um, I mean, it's so Hillary grew up in Southern California. I grew up in the South. My family was Protestant, and religion was completely absent from our celebration of Christmas.
In
Like it
Protestant family?
did. There was a crush, like a nativity scene, a nativity set, and that's we did Advent stuff at church on Sundays, but like as far as Christmas itself went, it was. I grew up with two brothers. It was definitely about the piles of presents, but I mean, food and travel was a big thing. So we would travel wherever we lived. We would travel to my aunt's in South Carolina and be there for about a week or 2 weeks. How that poor woman put up with all of us for two
I was
weeks,
gonna
I
say
don't
your
know.
poor
But
aunt, three young boys.
um,
Ugh.
yeah, but it was like for 2 solid weeks. We would get there before Christmas, and I'm pretty sure we would stay till New Year's. Like we would, the day we got off from school, we would leave. And this was back when we actually got about a week off before Christmas. But we would get there and there'd be a lot of food. And there are still foods that I like associate with Christmas that even though kind of adult me finds kind of repellent, I'm drawn to on some level. Cheese balls,
I was gonna say, please describe these foods. What
like
is a cheese
a
ball?
port wine cheese ball. So it's this kind of soft cheese that's rolled in nuts, and this is South, so it's usually pecans.
Oh my god.
And you serve it with crackers and stuff. So there would be that. Um, we did not have traditional fruitcake, but we had something called icebox fruitcake, which was made with which it's actually I've got the ingredients out. I'm making it today to take some to mail to some friends. It's got graham cracker crumbs because it's the South and graham cracker crumbs are in everything. It's got sweetened condensed milk because it's the South and sweetened condensed milk is in everything. Mini marshmallows, and usually the candied fruit that you put in fruitcake, or if you want to be like not so gross, you can use like raisins and things, and then some pecans, and you mix it all together, and you make these logs out of it, and you let them cure in the refrigerator for a week or so, and they are very interesting. It's an acquired taste, I think.
That sounds delicious.
The taste is really good. The texture some people find very odd because it's hard to describe. I think it's more like a candy. The texture is more like a candy, but we would do that. I mean, there were dishes that we just expected to have. Another was cheese crackers, which anybody who knows anything about the Southern United States knows that cheese straws are a hugely important thing. Have you encountered cheese straws in your time in Mississippi yet?
I don't know what a cheese straw is. No.
Okay, so it's a super simple um, dough that's made with butter, self-rising flour, and a lot of shredded sharp cheddar cheese, and you mix it together. And it's almost like a cheese shortbread. And you bake it, and you might add a little bit of cayenne pepper to it for a little zing. You also might put a pecan half on top of it. But they're these savory little cheesy cookies, and they're just great. And always growing up, those things, as fast as they could be made, those things would be eaten. Um, and then there was the last kind of specific thing I'll talk about are chocolate peanut butter balls, um, which growing up I thought was just peculiar to our house, but it turns out it's again a pretty wide thing in the South, which is kind of peanut butter, graham crackers, sweetened condensed milk, coconut, and chopped up pecans. And you roll it all together and you roll them into balls and then you dip them in chocolate. So they're kind of like some kind of truffle a little bit, but they're very similar to Buckeyes from Ohio. And they're very similar to kind of some candies and things like bourbon balls they have in Kentucky. But those things had to be around. If they weren't, it was like, what's going on? But we would, food was definitely very important. Um, Ham, I mean, it's the South, so there wasn't a Christmas turkey, it was a Christmas ham. Um, but I mean, presents, yeah. We only had two specific times to open presents. Christmas Eve, the whole extended family would get together with my aunts, my great aunt, my uncles, their families, all of us would be there. And you would open presents everyone gave each other. But then Christmas morning, you would open presents Santa Claus got you.
I mean, besides some of the foods that you're talking about, I mean, that sounds kind of familiar to me of what we would do. Just having family over and eating specific things. Like, so then the sweetened condensed milk is interesting because just today, I mean, I've been baking all day and that's why I lost track of time this week. It's just been like baking central, but I make like 7-layer bars that have crushed graham crackers, sweetened condensed milk, chocolate chips, butterscotch chips, coconut, right? Like the whole thing. I mean,
Those are from Canada.
those are from Canada.
They're called Nanaimo bars or Nanaimo bars.
See, I had no
Yeah,
idea. My
it
grandma,
was invented in Canada.
See, my grandma,
Although I think,
I don't know why she got those. I have no idea.
uh, although what's interesting, I think Australia also claims credit for inventing that. I would have to do a little more research on that.
See, I should research these things. And I mean, I've been making fudge. That's a huge thing to make is fudge. And that's a really old dessert. I mean, fudge
Hmm.
has been around for a long time. But for me, it's only around on Christmas. Like you're not just making fudge throughout the year. I mean, I hope not. My goodness. Um,
Yeah.
so the baking is really important, and I mean, I think that kind of connects to the banquets and the feasts and everything. Everyone's just kind of packing on weight. And if you think biologically speaking, like in the wintertime, people do eat a lot. So it's kind of connected to our biology, or at least our brains of what we think should be happening. Even though we have heating in our houses and we're not going to be needing the blubber to keep warm, but it's all kind of connected in that way.
Hmm.
Some new traditions that I've taken on since getting married is now Christmas Eve is more celebrated, which for us it really wasn't so much when I was growing up. It was more Christmas Day, Christmas dinner, Christmas breakfast. And we'll have all those still, but Christmas Eve is a really big deal for my husband and his family. And that's when they would open presents and they would get one present, one. And I'm like, whoa. So he looks at my Christmas and just thinks it's so excessive. But he would get one gift, and then they would eat tamales on Christmas. It would be like a really big feast and celebration. So this year he says he's going to go to Memphis to try to find tamales. I'm like, those are not going to be.
Those are different.
I know. I've been looking
Those
at
are
pictures, and they're not like what we grew up with in Southern California.
they're Delta. You want me to grab some down at the Mercado and FedEx them to you?
Can you? I would pay
Yeah,
you.
yeah, I'll
Honestly,
do that.
tried to do
I will do that.
I tried to do it
Um,
and like he's like, "No, it's okay. I'll just go to Memphis." I'm like, "Have you looked at the pictures of these?"
those
It's
are
not
those are Delta. Yeah, those are Delta tamales. They are very, very different. I think he's going to be disgusted by them.
well, they're
Like,
saucy. They're really weird looking.
right. Well, I mean, the great thing is in San Diego, like I can't walk more than 20 feet without being able to get a decent tamale somewhere at Christmas time. Like every place has
I
tamales.
go to the Walmart parking lot and like buy them out of the back of
Mhm.
the van.
What's your favorite tamale for Christmas?
The cheese and jalapeno.
The cheese and jalapeno.
Oh, yeah. Anyway,
Mine is
that's the new one.
I
What?
like I like the corn, just the plain corn,
Yeah, let's
but
get.
I love the pineapple one.
See, I'm not there. I'm not.
Oh, I love that pineapple tamale. I can only eat one. Whenever I get them, I always get like two, and I'm like, I need to get two of these. And when I finish the one, I'm like, that was good. I can't eat anymore.
See, I'll get them by the dozen and I'll just like defrost them for weeks and just eat tamales for weeks. But
Yeah.
they're so good. So that's a new tradition that I have. And, that of course has roots in Mexican culture. And what I think is so interesting about Christmas, and from what you're saying, and like how you celebrate it, and how I celebrate, and how everyone celebrates, is like this is just a uniquely American thing that we tried to create in order to create culture. I mean, obviously, we've talked for a long time, like it has all of these different roots, but the commercialism, the huge amount of like gift giving and Santa and all of this, I mean, it's just a very American thing to be doing. It's part of our culture, kind of how we talked about Thanksgiving. We were trying to create culture, and it's in the 1870s that it becomes finally declared as a national holiday. As you know, refer to our Thanksgiving episode. Thanksgiving was declared during Abraham Lincoln's administration, and that was connected to Civil War stuff. But it's not until the 1870s that Christmas is declared an actual national holiday. And I think that that's weird for people to think about. You know, just 150 years ago was when Christmas was declared a holiday.
Mm-hmm.
But it has roots in a lot of different places. But the way that we celebrate it now, I mean, we've kind of created this whole shebang where we kind of think like, oh, well, it goes way back. But I mean, we just created this whole mythology and commercialized it in the way that we have. And people from all denominations celebrate Christmas. So I found a quote in.
Well, not even, and just not just that, but people who aren't religious at all celebrate Christmas.
Yeah, because it's a pretty secular thing now. I mean, it doesn't really have a lot to do with celebrating the birth of Christ, and that's for a lot of different reasons. Again, we mentioned early on that like Jesus probably wasn't even born in December. And I mean, we know that almost, I can say without a doubt. We don't know exactly when it was, but I can tell you with almost certainty it wasn't in December. So I found a quote from a newspaper in Philadelphia in 1877. And this is for our Jewish listeners. It says, quote, even in the home of the Hebrew brethren, Christmas trees bloomed. They also said the little ones of Israel were as happy over them as Christian children. And so the idea is that this is an American celebration. This is how Americans celebrate this moment in December. And it's not really created, or it doesn't have to be about Christianity, and it's actually not. And that by 1900, about 1 in 5 homes had a Christmas tree in it. So it just becomes something to celebrate, you know, being American and having this celebration in December rather than being about something rooted in religion.
Mm-hmm. So let me ask you this: do you have any other traditions you developed, like as far as movies, books that you read during Christmas, anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of books, especially kids' books now for Christmas. The Night Before Christmas, A Christmas Carol. The Night Before Christmas was actually written in the 19th century, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, as was Christmas Carol, and Christmas Carol harkens back to those ghost stories.
Yeah, and had a lot of meaning from some of the earlier writing in the 1820s by Washington Irving. So again, like the mythology being created is a lot of authors who create a lot of these stories. But I always watch Elf is one of my favorite ones to watch. I always watch The Peanuts Christmas, Home Alone, Christmas Vacation, the National Lampoon's one. Yeah, you watch different things. It's when you think about it, it's like a super lazy time. I mean, you're busy all the time because you're like wrapping presents and buying this and buying that, and it's a frantic time, but it's also just kind of you're eating a lot and watching a lot more TV and staying
Mm-hmm.
inside more. I don't know. What about you? Do you have like essential viewing or reading or
Elf has entered into the rotation. Christmas Vacation has been on the list for a long time. It just kills me. It's also one of the reasons I don't want a live tree in my house.
yeah. Yeah.
But I mean, the one that we always watch is Christmas Story. We usually watch it a couple of times. In fact, so I have to make an admission. Um, some of our decorations are a Christmas village from A Christmas Story. So we have like Ralphie's house, we have the school, we have the Chinese restaurant they go to after the Bumpkus Hounds eat there at dinner. And then we have Higbee's department store. And we've even got like the flagpole with Flick's tongue stuck to it. We love that movie. So we watch it. I mean, we watch our own copy of it, but then during the holidays, inevitably, I think it's TBS or somebody like plays it 24 hours a day, Christmas Day. Inevitably, some point on Christmas Day, it'll end up just turned there and we'll watch it for a little while. We watch that. Nightmare Before Christmas is a big one we love to watch. Uh, and then there are some other things that are a little more esoteric. Is Die Hard a Christmas movie? That's always a big debate. I love to watch it at Christmas.
I've heard so many people I know watch Die Hard at Christmas. It's an essential viewing. I'm not one of them, but I have friends. Yeah.
I mean, it's set in Christmas, but by that logic, then The French Connection is also a Christmas movie. Um, and then this is from my youth. I hate to watch the Star Wars Holiday Special. It is
Really bad.
it is so deliciously awful. You can find it on YouTube. You don't even have to be very creative to find it. George Lucas tried to destroy all copies of this thing because it is a big stinky pile. One thing it does have in it, it has the first appearance of Boba Fett. It's in an animated short, but it's got Art Carney, B. Arthur, Diane Carroll, Jefferson Starship. Who else is in it? I'm leaving a couple of people out. It's if you've not inflicted this on yourself, you need to, because it's so bad it goes around and almost becomes good again. It's just so incredibly awful. But I always love to watch that. And then my favorite thing ever, and I would suggest anybody who has not seen this to watch it. Jim Henson in the 70s did this great adaptation of a book that when I was a child, I loved. It's called Emmett Otter's Jug Band Christmas. And it was a special for HBO back in the late 70s. And you can actually get it. You can get digital copies of it now, or you can get Blu-ray or DVDs copies of it. It is wonderful. And I love it. And it just, to me, it means Christmas. It's basically a retelling it's a combination of a couple of traditional Christmas stories, not the Christmas story, but traditional Christmas stories. Kind of like Gift of the Magi. It's kind of like a retelling of that. I love it.
I don't know that one.
It's the girls will love it. They
They're
will
really
absolutely
into
love
Christmas movies. We've been watching a lot of Christmas movies every day.
it. You should check it. I know you can get it on Apple. I think you can get it on Google Play as well. It's really good. It's so wonderful.
All right.
And it's just sweet. And it's just like, it's not crass and it's not overly commercial or anything. It's just like a sweet movie. Which, I mean, in many ways, it's a lot like Elf. Like Elf, if you don't pay attention, seems like a really crass commercial thing. But when you get to it, that's not really the point at all.
I love that movie so much. It's canon now for me. I mean, it's so good. You think that like, oh, there can't be a good Christmas movie anymore, but man, that one, it's one of my favorites. Now, there's a big divide in our house over the real life Grinch, like the actual people, like so Jim Carrey and the Grinch. Is it Jim Carrey? No.
Jim Carrey was the first one. They just did a live action one recently. They got really bad reviews.
Well, we don't like the one that's like the live action. I like just the animated, How the Grinch Stole Christmas.
Oh, okay.
That one's cute.
The one that Boris Karloff. No, is it Lon Chaney or Boris Karloff? I forget which of them narrates it. Okay.
Anyway, that's a good one. I mean, I think that the live action one's kind of funny, but I don't know, the costumes and stuff, it's a little creepy.
Well, I mean, no matter how you celebrate the holidays, I mean, it's, I think there's a way to approach it where it's not grossly commercial, because a lot of the things we've talked about at the end of the day, it gets back to kind of family being together. And I know that's going to be tough for people this year.
It's going to be
not being
a
able to kind of
year. Yeah, I mean, see our pandemic episode. It's a hard
right.
year, and so if it does give you a lot of comfort to just bake and eat and watch TV, like let's do this. We're at the finish
Hmm.
line of this year. It's not the finish line of this pandemic, but I'm hoping as we welcome in this new year that things will just start on an upward trajectory for us as a country, and that we can continue, you know, celebrating in the ways that we're used to celebrating, maybe just without so much family around. It's a bummer.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, celebrate virtually with your family.
Zoom Christmas, Zoom miss.
And then you can have a second Christmas in July. You can have Christmas in July with your family.
I'm all for that. I mean, Hallmark's
Yeah.
celebrating Christmas in July. That's when they roll out their Christmas ornaments. It crushes me every year. You walk into a
Mhm.
Hallmark and it's like a Christmas explosion in July. I just get so mad about it. But anyway, this was fun
Well,
talking
anyway,
history.
yeah, this was great. Well, I hope people had some fun listening to us. Drop us a line, share in the comments, share your favorite Christmas traditions. But happy holidays.
Have a good one. Thanks for joining us. Bye bye.
Silent night, holy night.